Live tonight will discuss the role of traditional rulers in nation building, featuring the Oni of Ife, Etsu Nupe, Emir of Zazzau, Eze Iweka III, Emir of Lafia, Egbere Emere Okori of Eleme Kingdom. Join us to listen to the wisdom of these custodians of our culture and heritage.
We're privileged to be joined by some highly revered traditional rulers across the country. It's my pleasure to begin to introduce them at this point. May I welcome to this program His Royal Highness Alhaji Yahaya Abubakar, CFR, the Etsu Nupe and Chairman, Niger State Council of Traditional Rulers and Coordinating Chairman, National Traditional Rulers Council of Nigeria. He joins us from Bida, Niger State. Your Royal Highness Bagadoji, thank you for joining us on NTA Tuesday Live. Let me also welcome to this program the Oni of Ife, His Imperial Majesty Oba Adeyeye Enitan Ogunwusi Ojaja II. He joins us from Ile-Ife. Also joining us tonight on the program, His Royal Highness Justice Sidi Bage, Emir of Lafia and Chairman Council of Chiefs, Nasarawa State, is a retired Justice of the Supreme Court. He joins us from Lafia. We'll be privileged to also have with us His Royal Highness Malam Ahmed Nuhu Bamali, CFR, the Emir of Zazzau and Chairman Kaduna State Council of Chiefs. He joins us from Zaria. Your Royal Highness, we welcome you to NTA Tuesday Live. Let me also introduce His Royal Highness King Appolus Chu, OFR, the Egbere Emere Okori and One Heir-in-Chair the 10th of Eleme Kingdom in River State. He joins us from Port Harcourt. And also joining us tonight will be His Majesty Igwe Chibudem Iweka Eze Iweka III, the traditional ruler of Obusi. At this point, let's go straight to Lafia and introduce into the discussion the Emir of Lafia and Chairman Council of Chiefs, Nasarawa State, retired Justice of the Supreme Court, Royal Highness Justice Sidi Bage. Thank you so much for being with us. And there's a lot that has been said about what the traditional institution can contribute to nation building. And of recent, many Nigerians have called out to have specific roles assigned to traditional rulers in the constitution. And so it moves them away from the largely ceremonial role they play at this time. And we'd like you to share your thoughts with us on this and this position of the traditional institution and how it can play a much more critical role in developing the nation and its institutions.
Well, thank you very much, Cyril. Good evening, Nigerians and the viewers. This topic of the role of the traditional rulers as custodians of culture and tradition, which affects the growth of the nation, is it's in a wide spectrum. But I think that it is important for us to look at the historical fact of how it all started, how it grew, and then later, if we may suggest the fall of the position or the role of the traditional rulers, and then we examine the position where we are today, and then we think of where we should be tomorrow. Now, let's go back to the historical fact. It all started with what we can call the Lugadian logic of necessity. This was invented by Sir Lord Lugard himself in his annual report of 1904. He sent a report to the colonial administration in 1904 after examining the vastness of the colony that the British had to govern. And he realized that it was so vast and they had very few colonial administrators and support staff that could help in managing this wide colony. In the annual report of 1904, Lord Lugard said he had examined what was on ground, and he had seen, especially largely on the Northern Protectorate, that there had existed an established order, and that the British could make use of that established order to help in administering that large, vast colony. Because what he understood from the examination is that those rulers he found on ground had a bond between the leaders and the led, those of the people that they were leading then. He understood that word amana, trust, between the people and their leaders. So he said it could be very easy for the administration to make use of those leaders and to send the message or the policies of the administration. And that's what later metamorphosed as what we call the indirect rule and whatever. Now, that was the Lugardian thought. This moved on until around the year 1922. Hugh Clifford, who was then in charge of the administration, took over from Lugard. Hugh Clifford decided that they should go into the first constitution that was written down for the administration of the colony. In it, Clifford decided that he was going to include the traditional rulers that they were using for what they call, whatever they call it, the indirect rule or indirect administration, into the Constitution of 1922. And at that time, some roles were determined in the Constitution for the traditional rulers, and of course, a large portion of it was left for the colonial administration. But what became clearer was in 1946, when Richardson, who took over from Hugh Clifford, decided that some form of, because of agitations and so on and so forth from the elites of those days, to establish what can be referred to as an orderly government with different strata. Richardson, in the 1946 Constitution, decided to create what can be referred to as a bicameral assembly, having a House of Assembly probably of elected representatives and a House of Chiefs, which was supposed to be like a mix of it. That was for Northern Protectorate. For the Southern Protectorate, especially the Southwest, the traditional rulers were selected into the assembly of the respective headquarters of the Western Protectorate. And then some of them were given opportunity to sit at the Protectorate of this, the assembly of the center, which you could represent as the Senate. Some traditional rulers were given opportunity to sit in that so-called Senate, and they had rights, privileges, the right to vote, and the right even to propose motions. Now, those were at that level. At the peripheral level, some duties were assigned to the traditional rulers. They took charge of the basic local administration. They named that in Richardson as native authority. The traditional rulers now became the head of that native authority. And they were given specific role of what to play. They were in charge, firstly, of the environment. They took charge of the environment because that was very important in order to secure the land. The traditional rulers were asked specifically to take charge of the forest area, look after the forest so that it can be properly manned. If your forest is properly manned, it will not give way to any strange behavior around the forest area. And then when you come to the internal factor, the traditional rulers had the responsibility of taking charge of some of the basic administration that the colonial masters had contemplated to establish. They were the head of the native authority, which includes education, which includes the prison service, and they were to render some quasi-judicial duties. So the traditional rulers started playing direct rule in the administration and governance, because the colonial administration and those of them that were in charge could not have had the opportunity of coming down to that basic level. So the traditional rulers were the head. They were the ones that were directly in charge of the native authority. Now, after Richardson, Macpherson came with his constitution in 1951. Macpherson, especially with respect to the Northern Protectorate, the Southern Protectorate maintained a balance of a mix of the traditional rulers and their respective assemblies. They sit together. Some of them were nominated. They were not elected like the elected representatives, but they were nominated by the colonial administration, and they sit there and had voting right and could participate in all political activities. Now, after the Macpherson, what happened was that changes began to emerge because of the elites that were fighting to secure the independence of the country from the hands of the colonial masters. So there was this conflict and lack of distrust between those ones trying to establish the independence of the country and the traditional rulers. So it grew like that constitutionally after Macpherson. Roberts came with his constitution. I will just limit it. Came with his constitution 58 to 60, which was supposed to be the constitutional, which was to take the country to its independence. Now that was where the problem came in. With the Roberts Constitution, the role of the traditional rulers started going down completely. It was there in all the other subsequent constitutions, Lillington, and then of course Robert himself. But the deadliest blow was the 1963 Constitution itself, when we returned to the administration, to the homegrown, to our politicians that took over. They took away whatever was left of the role of the traditional rulers with respect to the legislature, and left, especially in the northern part of the country, the traditional rulers to continue managing the native authority. That spanned up to the change of government of 1966, then from then on, the role of the traditional rulers in direct governance ceased. It started going down from the fact when the reforms of 1967 happened, judicial power was taken away completely from the traditional rulers. The Alkali court or the Emir's courts were abolished completely. In its place, the area courts and subsequent courts came in. But again, the worst of it that happened was the reform of 1976, the Dasuki report, which changed the entire structure, removing the hands of the traditional institution completely from the governance of the native authorities. Dasuki's report took away those powers, and that was the first of its kind, introducing executive powers possibly to elected officers to govern the local authority. And that was the beginning of the problem of the country. When the traditional rulers were in charge, right from the time of the Lugadian days, every system was working correctly. Especially the native authority, and especially at the local level. Now, after the reform, when the politicians took over from the traditional rulers, then the problem started. All of those institutions that were established and had standard, because you can compare the standard of the schools in Nigeria at that time, especially at the peripheral level, at the primary level, they are as good as you going to a primary school in the UK or in the US. That was the time of the traditional rulers. But when the politicians took over, things started falling apart. I'm sorry, but that is a fact of life. It continued like that. And the traditional rulers eventually became mere observers. They were only expected to complement whatever policy that the government had established. They had no specific role. Now quickly, Cyril, let me talk about, because I've taken so much time in history, let me say a little about what the future may portend. Very important. We need to look back, because we have to accept what system could be good for us. This system that we are operating for now, whether we agree or not, it has failed completely. None of us, not one, would like to send his child to the public school. None of us would like to go to the basic dispensary for medication. None of us would like to avail with most of those services that are rendered. The traditional rulers are the ones that can do it. You can find in some jurisdiction, for example, Indonesia today, you go to the Constitution of Indonesia. At the local level, the people are to determine what kind of governance they would want for their better administration. And that's why today in Indonesia, there are local governments that are governed by the traditional rulers, because that is the choice of the people. And others could still go by the means of democracy as it is prescribed. But I want to say this, Cyril, which is very important. Record has shown that those local councils, even in Indonesia, that are governed by the traditional rule, are far better managed, and have made better progress in terms of development. We had made a proposal, like one of us had said. I was the chairman of a committee on trying to find a role of the traditional rulers, especially in the northern part of the country, and sent to the National Assembly. The 19 governors appointed me to come out with a draft. We did that. We submitted to the National Assembly. I'm sure that they have not taken time to look at those documents. If they had, they would have seen so many interesting things that could help them in the constitutional amendment that was going to find some role, especially especially because we were faced with security challenges in the country. And the management of security cannot be left in the hand of the conventional agencies. It's very difficult because the terrain is only understood by those of them on ground. And if you allow the traditional rulers to take charge of the environment, the management of the forest and other pockets could be easier because they know the terrain better. They know where it is, and they know where whatever evil that is around that terrain could be determined. And that's why it's easier to flush out any vagabond that is living around those environments. But the traditional rulers don't have the power, the wherewithal to do all of these things. It's all in the hand of the conventional security. So these are some of those things. And I will still insist that we can still avail ourselves with the opportunity of looking at what kind of administration would be better for our local governments.
Right.
Because as of now today, we must admit the local administration, especially the third tier of administration in our country, has completely failed. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you so much, Your Royal Highness, my Lord. Thank you.